Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Zain. I study at the University of Manchester and I'm starting medicine there this fall. In today's video, I'll be telling you about the one strategy or the one technique that I used to consistently score grades in the top percentile during my previous degree, Biomedical Sciences. The method is called the Question Recall Framework, and I first heard about this from either an Ali Abdal or Thomas Frank video that I watched about 2 years ago. I'll link it in the description below. But I wanted to really share how I used it, how I adapted it for my exams, and how you can do the same thing. The video is going to be split up into 4 sections. The first one, a quick outline of what the method is. Second, how I used it for my exams and how I applied it. How people doing non-medicine degrees like chemistry, physics, maths can also apply it. And lastly, I'll be sharing my honest experience and my insights with using active recall methods like this one for the last 2 years, the pros, but also the cons. What the method is that you convert all the study material from PowerPoints and textbooks that you have to study for exams into questions so that you can actively test yourself on those questions in your own time. And honestly, this was game-changing because early on I realized that the majority of the information that I needed to learn for my exams was all in the lecture handouts or the PowerPoints. So instead of taking notes or spending hours summarizing the textbook like most people were doing, all I did was that I just made a ton of questions the first time I was trying to go through these PowerPoints and understand the information. So that when it came time to revise this, I would then be able to go through these questions one by one and test myself on them. And by testing myself on them 2 to 3 times, by understanding all the information that I needed to understand, I genuinely came to know my course material so well and ended up doing really well in the exams. Now obviously the whole purpose behind this method is to test yourself, to assess your understanding. And by putting effort in your learning, you will understand the information better, you will learn it faster, and you will retain it for a longer period of time. This is the whole concept behind active recall or active retrieval. This is an effective studying method that has been researched heavily. There's a ton of studies online about it, there's a lot of videos, and there's also a great book called Make It Stick that you can read. All of these different sources will teach you the differences between learning effectively and learning ineffectively. But first, let me show you how the method worked for me. I'm gonna be completely transparent with you guys. The questions I started making here, I just read them and they aren't the best. The thing is, the reason I'm showing you this is because I want to show you how I did it as someone who was just starting off, someone who's just a beginner, and someone who's putting complete faith in this no note-taking, only questions active recall method. This was made in the winter break before my exams, and at that point I was so behind on lectures, and the ones that I actually went to, I barely remember anything from them. So basically, I started going through the slides and creating the questions for the first time in those 3 weeks before the exams, and it was still so doable. People have this misconception that you need to be on the ball from day one when you're trying to do something like this, when in reality, I literally did this in that last period before my exams. So even doing a week of creating these questions and following up on it with testing yourself would be better than just making notes and rereading your textbook. Essentially, whilst going through the lecture slides for the first time, what you need to do is that you need to create questions for the content within those slides side by side. And I'd aim for around 1 or 2 of these questions per slide. The surprising thing for me was that converting the information into questions itself was beneficial, because I'm not someone who is able to concentrate on reading something for a long period of time. So the fact that I had to engage with the knowledge and then create questions on it meant that I had to understand the information, prioritize it, and then filter out good quality questions. That is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to creating these questions, is that how do you make them good quality? How do you make them useful and relevant? There's 2 things that I suggest you do to make them useful and relevant. Firstly, go find a past paper. Go find a past paper for the exam that you're giving. If you don't have it, ask your teacher, ask older students, find it online. You need to have a look at the types of questions and the types of knowledge that you're going to be assessed on, so that you can cater your question making to that type of knowledge and that type of question. Second, go through the syllabus of the course that you're studying, one by one, line by line. You need to fully understand the structure of the course before even starting to make the questions. By getting a bird's eye view, before you even start learning about these questions, you'll be able to easily understand and prioritize the things you have to learn. And for me specifically, I had this wrong perfectionist mindset that I had to understand everything on every single slide, because in my head I thought, what if it came up on the exam? This is so important. You need to be practical and very smart with the things that you're trying to revise. Don't waste time on things that aren't high yield and aren't applicable to your exams. Next, you need to assess your understanding of the topics from these questions. So what you do is that you go through these questions one by one and see how well you can answer it. Say the answer in your head, say it out loud, write it down, do whatever works for you, but put effort in your learning and try your best to remember and work out the answer. Because remember, the more effort you put, the better you will retain that knowledge, even if you don't get to the answer. And then, as you can see here, I color code the questions red, green, orange, depending on the difficulty and how difficult I found it to answer that question. And even though it seems like a small thing, it can be so useful when you're revising, because at the end of it, it helps you prioritize your learning. And that is the key here. So what I do to better understand the weaker concepts and fill in my knowledge gaps, I wouldn't write 2-liner or 3-liner answers beneath each question. And yes, this is annoying for a lot of people because you don't have all the answers in the same place. But because I went back to the PowerPoints and I took those extra few minutes to find my answers in the lecture handouts instead of writing them down, I ended up saving a lot of time, firstly, from not having to write the answers down when I was making the questions. And when I went back to find those answers, I'd get them in a full structured PowerPoint, in context and well explained. I wouldn't get a random 2-liner answer that gives me no context about the process or the wider concept. I get it within a structured PowerPoint. And that is so useful when you're trying to understand and learn something. So it's much more helpful if you go back to the PowerPoint and understand the wider process by looking at that 2-liner answer. Because obviously when you look at that in a structured PowerPoint, you're going to be looking at the stuff above, the stuff below, you're going to be looking at other information or other diagrams that link into that process, and you're going to end up seeing how it fits in the bigger picture a lot better. This actually ended up really helping me in my online open book timed exams, because I went through the slides so many times because I kept on going back from those questions to the slides. I ended up building such a good mental image, and I basically knew where everything was on those slides. So when I look at a question, I see 2 pieces of information that I needed to answer that question, and I know exactly where they are and on which PowerPoint they're on. And by having this good image of the structure of the whole course, I was able to answer these questions with much more ease compared to the rest of the people in my year. Now let's talk about how people that don't do medicine or bio degrees can actually apply this method as well. Because the majority of the active recall or the effective studying videos that I've seen online are made by medical students and are targeted at medical students or medical applicants. But the thing is, anyone can use this question recall method as long as they adapt the questions that they create to the knowledge they're being assessed on and the types of questions that are going to be there in their exams. For humanities students, again, adapt the type of questions you're creating to the content you're going to be assessed on. Whether it's economics, business, psychology, history, law, whichever exam you'll have, you will use this same method of going to the lecture handouts, creating questions side by side, testing yourself on those questions, highlighting them, filling in your knowledge gaps for your weaker topics, and then coming back and testing yourself again and again until your understanding is solid enough. For chemistry, physics, engineering, and math students that have calculation-based exams, it's a bit different. After talking to a lot of these students, what I found out was that the main challenge when it comes to tackling a problem within the exam for these subjects is that you have to be good at looking at that problem, identifying the method you're going to use for it, and then actually using that method. So what you need to do is that you need to create 1 or 2 questions for every problem type that you'll encounter in the exam. For example, instead of including 10 redox titration questions, you should only include 1 or 2 of them, because you have to assess whether you can identify the method that you have to use, and then you have to also use that method. If you include 1 or 2 questions for every question type or every problem type that you'll face in the exam, you'll have a massive list of questions with different question types on each one. The whole point of having only 1 or 2 questions for each problem or question type is to assess your ability to identify the method that you need to use for that problem, as well as assess your understanding of the method. But let's say the redox titration problems you faced were really weak for you. So now you go back to the textbook and do 20 of those questions to practice and help you understand the method. Yes, the textbooks you're using are great for helping you understand the method, but actually assessing your ability to apply that method to a specific question in an unknown situation is key here, which is why I think this method really does work for the people who have calculation-based exams and also content-based exams. And lastly, I wanted to share my honest experience when it comes to using these active recall methods for the last 2 years during all of my exams. I wanted to really share my insights and tell you about the pros and also the cons. Now, testing yourself and using these active recall methods is unmatched. No questions asked. It is the most effective way of studying, and there's so many studies online that prove this better than I ever could. But the one thing I wish someone had told me, or that I'd realized, was that testing yourself and putting huge amounts of effort is not the only way to revise. Yes, it would be amazing if I was able to put huge amounts of effort and actively recall every time I was revising. But the reality is, when you're studying for a long-term exam, there's gonna be days when you don't feel like it. There's gonna be days when you aren't as bothered, when you came home from a long day and you don't want to study, especially if it's going to require hard work. And because I thought that active recall was the only way to go, because all the creators online, all the studies I'd read had said that the other revision techniques were less effective, I would just not bother studying at all on the days when I was tired or when I didn't feel like it. And this was a mistake, because doing less effective but more relaxed revision is always going to be better than doing none at all. And when I say less effective and more relaxed, I mean you could watch a video, you could just read the textbook and do something that's more fun and more chill. And even though this would be less effective, I really think having a 70-30 balance, where 70% of the time you're doing hard work, you're doing active recall, and you're putting in the effort to retain the knowledge, but 30% of the time you take more relaxed approaches. And the thing is, you're allowed to test yourself in a less strict way, in a more relaxed way on some days, which is why that 70-30% balance was so helpful. It really did help me stay motivated and helped my consistently build up so much over time compared to when I started off. And yeah, that's about it. That was the one strategy, the one practical technique that I used to consistently score top grades for the last 2 years. I didn't waste any time on note-taking. I created questions, tested myself on them, built my understanding, and then repeated the process of testing myself a few times. It ended up saving me a huge amount of time at uni to do the things that I actually wanted to, and I'd highly suggest that you start following it regardless of the subject that you're doing. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe for more content in the future, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.